Before the legions of Rome ever set foot on Britain's shores, the island pulsed with the energy of ancient tribes, sacred stones, and warrior kings. But when empire met Earth, everything changed. This is the story of a land transformed, from mist-shrouded Celtic rituals to the iron grip of Roman order. Welcome to a forgotten frontier where myth and history collide. Long before the legions of Rome set foot on its shores, Britain was a land of mystery, myth, and immense cultural diversity. This island, isolated by seas yet linked to the broader prehistoric world through trade and migration, was home to a mosaic of tribal societies whose lives were shaped by the rhythms of nature, the demands of survival, and the pull of spiritual beliefs. The story of ancient Britain is not simply one of conquest. It is a rich tapestry of resilience, adaptation, and transformation. Geographically, Britain offered a varied landscape. Windswept highlands in the north, fertile lowlands in the south, dense woodlands, and an extensive network of rivers and coasts. These diverse terrains influenced how ancient peoples lived, hunted, farmed, and defended their communities. The lack of central authority created a patchwork of tribal lands, each with its own leadership, customs, and language dialects. From the towering megaliths of Stonehenge to the fortified hilltop settlements that dotted the countryside, evidence of early ingenuity and community cohesion is abundant. Exploring the transition from tribal independence to Roman domination is vital for understanding the cultural foundation of Britain. This period of transformation is marked by conflict, negotiation, and synthesis. The Celts, the dominant cultural group prior to the Roman arrival, were not a monolithic people, but a network of tribes bound by language, belief systems, and social structure. The eventual imposition of Roman rule did not erase this Celtic identity, but rather layered over it a new administrative and architectural order, some of which would echo into medieval and even modern British society. This documentary seeks to illuminate the dynamic changes that occurred in Britain from the time of its early inhabitants through the Roman conquest. It aims to peel back the layers of time to understand how geography shaped culture, how belief shaped governance, and how war shaped legacy. Through archaeology, ancient texts, and cutting-edge research, we will journey from the dawn of settlement to the eve of empire. The earliest human footprints on British soil date back nearly 1,000,000 years, but it was during the Mesolithic and Neolithic periods that more permanent patterns of settlement began to emerge. The Mesolithic era, circa 10,000 to 4,000 BCE, saw hunter-gatherers navigate forests and rivers, living in small, mobile groups. Their tools, made from flint and bone, offer a glimpse into a world shaped by intimate knowledge of the natural environment. The Neolithic period, circa 4000 to 2500 BCE, ushered in a revolution: agriculture. Early Britons began clearing forests to plant barley and wheat, domesticating animals like cattle and sheep. These developments led to the establishment of more permanent settlements. Neolithic societies constructed longhouses and communal buildings, reflecting growing social complexity. Perhaps the most awe-inspiring legacy of this era is the megalithic culture, epitomized by monuments like Stonehenge and Avebury. These stone circles, aligned with celestial events, suggest a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and a shared spiritual or religious ideology. The labor required to build these structures indicates the existence of organized leadership and a communal sense of purpose. Burial practices from this period further illustrate early religious beliefs. Long barrows and chambered tombs served as communal graves, often accompanied by grave goods such as pottery, tools, and ornaments. These practices reflect a belief in an afterlife and a reverence for ancestors, laying the foundation for spiritual continuity in later Celtic traditions. Pre-Celtic Britain was a land in flux, yet it was already marked by deep human ingenuity and a powerful connection to the land. These early societies laid the groundwork for the more complex tribal structures that would emerge with the arrival of the Celts. The Celts began arriving in Britain during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age, around 700 BCE. Their migration, driven by a combination of population pressures, conflict, and the allure of new lands, introduced a new cultural dynamism to the island. Originating from Central Europe, the Celts brought with them advanced metalworking skills, new social structures, and a distinctive language group known as the Insular Celtic languages. Archaeological evidence points to multiple waves of migration rather than a single invasion. The Hallstatt and La Tène cultures from continental Europe provide clear links to the Celtic influence in Britain, seen in burial rites, pottery, and artistic motifs. Unlike their Neolithic predecessors, the Celts introduced iron tools and weapons, significantly enhancing agricultural efficiency and military capability. Celtic society was tribal and hierarchical. At the core were clans led by chieftains or kings, supported by a warrior aristocracy and a class of priests known as Druids. The Druids played a crucial role, serving as religious leaders, legal authorities, and keepers of oral tradition. Their influence permeated every aspect of Celtic life, from seasonal festivals to warfare and diplomacy. The Celts lived in fortified hill forts, which served both defensive and administrative functions. These structures, strategically located and often massive in scale, reflect a society prepared for both internal rivalry and external threats. Inside these enclosures were roundhouses, storage pits, and artisan workshops, suggesting vibrant community life. Iron Age technology allowed for more sophisticated weaponry and tools, while their artistic expression flourished in intricate metalwork, ceramics, and body adornment. The torque, a rigid neck ring, symbolized status and identity. The Celts' oral culture was rich with mythology and hero tales, many of which would survive in later medieval literature. The arrival of the Celts did not erase the past, but built upon it. They adapted to Britain's landscapes and inherited some traditions from Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples. As they spread across the island, their influence grew, setting the stage for the dramatic encounters with the Roman Empire centuries later. As the Iron Age progressed, Britain evolved into a landscape dominated by powerful tribal entities, each commanding specific territories and exerting varying degrees of influence. Among the most prominent of these were the Iceni in the east, the Trinovantes in the southeast, the Brigantes in the north, and the Catuvalauni near modern-day Hertfordshire. These tribes were more than isolated communities. They formed dynamic polities engaged in diplomacy, rivalry, and occasional warfare. Political organization within the tribes varied but typically centered around a king or queen, supported by a council of nobles and warriors. Power was often hereditary, but it could also be seized through strength and strategic alliances. Intertribal relations were complex, involving both cooperation and conflict. Alliances were often sealed through marriage or mutual defense pacts, while disputes over land, resources, or prestige could erupt into war. Warfare was central to tribal identity. Warriors were revered, and martial prowess was a crucial path to power. Celtic warriors fought with iron swords, spears, and shields, often adorned with intricate designs that symbolized status and lineage. Chariots, a striking feature of British tribal warfare, provided mobility and psychological advantage in battle. Hill forts doubled as both defensive bastions and symbols of dominance, often located at strategic points to control trade routes or natural resources. Despite their frequent conflicts, the tribes of Britain were not isolated. They maintained robust trade networks with the continent, especially with Gaul, modern-day France. Goods such as salt, tin, lead, and wool were traded for wine, fine pottery, and luxury items. These exchanges brought wealth and foreign influence, seen in imported styles of art and weaponry. Artistic expression in tribal Britain was vivid and symbolic. Celtic art is characterized by swirling patterns, animal motifs, and abstract forms. Jewelry such as torques and brooches were not only decorative, but also conveyed social rank. Weapons were often elaborately decorated, blending function with aesthetic expression. These artifacts speak to a people deeply invested in identity, honor, and beauty, traits that would continue to define British culture even under Roman rule. The first significant Roman interaction with Britain came during the twilight of the Roman Republic. In 55 BCE, Julius Caesar, then proconsul of Gaul, launched an expedition across the Channel. His motivations were multifaceted: to punish British tribes for supporting Gaulish resistance, to expand Roman prestige, and to test the island's resources and defenses. Caesar's own account, Commentari de Bello Gallico, offers detailed, if self-aggrandizing, descriptions of these campaigns. In his first expedition, Caesar landed with 2 legions, but faced fierce resistance from British warriors. Storms disrupted his supply lines, and after several skirmishes, he withdrew. Undeterred, Caesar returned in 54 BCE with a larger force. This time, he established a temporary foothold, defeated a coalition of tribes led by Cassivellaunus, and extracted tribute before retreating. Despite the military setbacks and the brevity of the occupation, these expeditions had lasting impact. They marked the first formal Roman engagement with Britain and introduced the idea of conquest to the Roman elite. British resistance was formidable. The use of chariots, guerrilla tactics, and intimate knowledge of the terrain allowed the tribes to avoid total defeat. Though Caesar claimed victory, He recognized the logistical challenges and political costs of full occupation. Caesar's withdrawal did not signal Roman disinterest. On the contrary, it laid the groundwork for future campaigns. Trade between Britain and Rome increased, and British rulers began adopting Roman customs to curry favor. For many Britons, Rome had become both a threat and a valuable trading partner. In the wake of Caesar's departure, Britain entered a period of internal restructuring and cautious engagement with the Roman world. Without Roman oversight, native tribes resumed their political rivalries, yet the influence of Rome continued to grow in subtle ways. The power vacuum left by Caesar's brief incursions allowed tribes like the Catuvellauni to expand their territory. Under leaders such as Cunobelinus, often equated with Shakespeare's Cymbeline, the Catuvellauni became dominant in southern Britain. Cunobelinus established diplomatic ties with Rome, issuing coins that bore Latin inscriptions and Roman-style imagery, a symbol of both adaptation and aspiration. Roman goods flooded British markets. Amphorae of wine, glassware, and luxury textiles became common among the tribal elites. These material exchanges were accompanied by ideological ones. British rulers began to mirror Roman styles of governance, adopting titles like Rex, and organizing their courts in more centralized ways. However, this Romanization was selective and limited. While southern tribes grew closer to Rome, northern and western regions retained their traditional structures. The island was far from unified, and these internal divisions would prove critical during the Roman invasion under Emperor Claudius. Throughout this period, the Roman Empire kept a watchful eye on Britain. The memory of Caesar's expeditions lingered, and the island's strategic and economic potential remained alluring. The rise of aggressive leaders like Cunobelinus and his successors, who posed both a threat and an opportunity for Rome, increased the urgency for action. By the early 1st century CE, Rome was ready to turn its interest into intervention. With political stability restored under the early emperors, Claudius sought military glory to solidify his reign. Britain, still perceived as untamed and wealthy, offered the perfect target. Thus, while the decades between Caesar and Claudius saw no Roman legions on British soil, they were crucial in preparing both sides for the dramatic confrontation to come. Rome studied Britain, traded with its leaders, and influenced its elites. Britain, in turn, absorbed aspects of Roman culture while maintaining its fierce independence. The stage was set for conquest and transformation. In 43 CE, Emperor Claudius initiated a full-scale invasion of Britain, an ambitious campaign that would permanently alter the island's trajectory. Claudius, seeking to legitimize his rule after an unlikely ascension to power, viewed conquest as a means of demonstrating imperial strength. Britain, with its wealth and resources and history of defying Rome, became the ideal target. Planning for the invasion was meticulous. The task of leading the initial campaign was entrusted to Aulus Plautius, a seasoned general. Under his command, 4 Roman legions, totaling about 20,000 soldiers, along with auxiliary forces, crossed the English Channel. Among the key military leaders was Vespasian, who would later become emperor. Vespasian distinguished himself in battles across southern Britain, subduing numerous tribes and establishing a reputation for effective leadership. The Roman forces landed at Richborough, Rutupiae, in Kent, quickly establishing a beachhead. Initial campaigns focused on securing southeastern Britain, where resistance from tribes like the Catuvellauni was fierce. The tribal king Caradocus emerged as a formidable opponent, leading guerrilla-style campaigns against the Roman advance. Despite this resistance, Roman discipline, engineering, and superior tactics prevailed. Key battles were won, and Claudius himself visited Britain briefly to receive the surrender of several tribal leaders, a symbolic gesture that underscored the empire's might. Strategic city building began almost immediately. Roman forts sprang up across the landscape, often evolving into urban centers. The construction of roads allowed for rapid troop movement and integration of newly conquered areas. Cities like Camulodunum, Colchester, the first Roman capital, served both administrative and symbolic purposes, reinforcing Roman authority through architecture and presence. By the end of Claudius's reign, a substantial portion of southeastern Britain was under Roman control, setting the stage for further expansion and cultural transformation. While Rome's military conquests were swift, its imposition of control sparked fierce resistance. The most dramatic challenge came from Boudica, queen of the Iceni, in 6061 CE. Her revolt remains one of the most significant uprisings against Roman rule in the ancient world. The seeds of rebellion were sown after the death of King Prasutagus, Boudica's husband. The Romans, ignoring his will, annexed his kingdom, flogged Boudica, and raped her daughters. This brutal treatment exemplified Rome's disregard for local customs and elite autonomy. Boudica rallied the Iceni and neighboring tribes, including the Trinovantes. Fueled by outrage, they launched a coordinated assault on Roman settlements. Camulodunum, Colchester, was the first to fall, its Roman temple and garrison overrun. Next came Londinium, London, and Verulamium, St. Albans, both razed with massive loss of life. The Roman response, led by Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was decisive. After regrouping his forces, Suetonius confronted Boudica's army, reportedly outnumbered but better disciplined. At the Battle of Watling Street, the Romans crushed the rebellion. Boudica either took her own life or died shortly after. The revolt forced Rome to reassess its policies in Britain. Harsh reprisals gave way to a more conciliatory approach. Roman governors focused on integration, infrastructure, and appeasement of tribal elites. The rebellion also underscored the limits of Roman control and the enduring strength of local identities. Boudica became a lasting symbol of resistance, her story preserved in Roman and later British narratives. Her legacy reflects both the brutality of empire and the courage of those who opposed it. Following the suppression of major rebellions, Roman Britain entered a phase of consolidation and transformation. The focus shifted from conquest to colonization, and with it came dramatic changes in the landscape and culture. Urbanization was one of Rome's most visible contributions. Cities such as Londinium, Verulamium, and Iberacum, York, became centers of administration, commerce, and Roman life. These urban hubs featured typical Roman architecture: forums, baths, amphitheaters, and temples. Londinium, established as a vital port and administrative center, grew rapidly into a thriving metropolis. A network of roads, including Watling Street and Ermine Street, connected these cities and outposts, facilitating trade, communication, and military deployment. Bridges and way stations, mansiones, dotted the landscape, binding Britain more tightly into the Roman system. The Romanization of Britain extended beyond infrastructure. Public baths, temples to Roman gods, and marketplaces introduced new social norms. Latin became the language of administration and law, though native languages persisted in daily life. Villas and mosaics appeared in the countryside, especially among the wealthy elites who benefited from cooperation with Roman authorities. Local elites were gradually integrated into Roman society. They were offered citizenship, positions of authority, and opportunities for economic advancement. This policy of inclusion helped stabilize Roman rule and promoted loyalty among influential Britons. However, resistance did not vanish. In remote regions, especially in the north and west, Roman influence was limited. Here, traditional tribal structures endured, and occasional uprisings reminded Rome of the island's untamed character. Culturally, Britain became a fusion of Roman and native elements. Religious syncretism flourished as Celtic deities were merged with Roman gods. For example, the goddess Sulis was worshipped alongside Minerva at Bath, Aquae Sulis, illustrating the blending of spiritual traditions. By the early 2nd century, Roman Britain was a province both Roman and distinctively British. Its cities, roads, and cultural adaptations reflected the power of empire, but also the resilience and complexity of the island's people. Life in Roman Britain was a dynamic fusion of native traditions and imported Roman customs. For the native Britons, especially those living in urban centers, everyday life underwent substantial changes under Roman rule. Towns became bustling centers of administration, commerce, and social life. Roman settlers, officials, and veterans introduced new norms of dress, dining, language, and religion, which coexisted alongside older Celtic traditions. Natives living near Roman towns often adopted Roman-style clothing, such as tunics and togas, and participated in Roman-style markets and public baths. Latin became the language of governance and law, although many Britons continued to speak their native Brythonic dialects. The countryside, meanwhile, retained more of its traditional ways, though Roman-style villas and farming techniques slowly spread. Women played varied roles in Roman Britain depending on their status and ethnicity. Roman women of the elite class often managed large households, attended public events, and played roles in religious life, though their legal rights were still limited compared to men. Native women, particularly in tribal regions, could wield more authority, as seen in the leadership of figures like Boudica. Slaves were a significant part of the labor force and could be found working in households, farms, and mines. Merchants, both local and from across the Roman Empire, facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas, helping integrate Britain into the broader Roman economy. Agriculture remained the backbone of Roman Britain's economy. The introduction of Roman farming techniques, such as crop rotation and irrigation, boosted productivity. Grains, especially wheat and barley, were widely grown, along with vegetables, fruits, and livestock. Industrial production also saw growth, with centers for pottery, metalwork, and glass-making emerging, particularly in towns and near military camps. Roman villas dotted the countryside, especially in southern Britain. These estates were centers of agricultural production and reflected the wealth and Romanized lifestyle of the land-owning elite. Villas featured hypocaust heating systems, mosaic floors, and bath complexes. Their layout and luxury were indicative of Roman tastes, though they often incorporated local materials and designs. Trade linked Britain with the rest of the Roman Empire. Goods such as wine, olive oil, and fine pottery were imported, while Britain exported tin, lead, wool, and grain. Ports like Londinium and Dubris, Dover, became vital nodes in these commercial networks. This trade fostered economic growth and cultural exchange, further weaving Britain into the Roman world. The Roman conquest of Britain left an enduring legacy that would shape the island's history for centuries. Culturally and politically, Roman Britain was a transformative period, bringing urbanization, legal systems, and new religious practices. Roman governance introduced the concept of centralized administration and a codified legal framework, which influenced later British political development. Even after the Roman withdrawal in 410 CE, many elements of Roman civilization persisted. Roads, town layouts, and agricultural practices remained in use. Roman-built structures, including walls, villas, and amphitheaters, continued to dominate the landscape. Some towns retained their status as centers of trade and settlement, although many fell into decline as centralized authority faded. The legacy of Roman Britain is evident in British identity and archaeology. The ruins of Hadrian's Wall, the mosaics of Roman villas, and inscriptions in Latin serve as constant reminders of this formative era. These remnants have become integral to Britain's historical narrative, contributing to a sense of continuity and shared heritage. Roman Britain's story is one of cultural fusion. While Roman authorities imposed their institutions, local traditions endured and adapted. This blending produced a unique Romano-British culture, evident in art, religion, and daily life. Temples dedicated to Roman gods stood beside shrines to native deities. Local elites adopted Roman customs while retaining tribal identities. For viewers, understanding the ancient roots of Britain through the lens of the Roman conquest offers valuable insight into how external influence and native resilience shaped a nation. It highlights the complexity of cultural interaction and the long-lasting effects of imperial rule. The story of Roman Britain is not just one of conquest and resistance, but of transformation, a legacy still visible in Britain's landscapes, languages, and identities today.